Welcome to All Things for Good, a podcast for mental health professionals who are also individuals of faith. We hope that you gain insight into other specialties, identify some resources for collaboration or consultation, and feel welcome in the discussion. If you have a topic request or would like to be a guest, you can email us at allthingsforgoodpod@gmail.com. And please remember to like, share, download, give us those 5 stars so we can keep bringing you new episodes. We hope you enjoy. Hello, welcome back to All Things for Good. I am very excited about today's episode. So we are just going to jump in and have Kim introduce us to Chelom Leavitt.
Right. Thank you, Ashly. And thank you, Chelom, for being here. We are really excited to dig into today's topic. Before we do, though, I want to just briefly introduce Chelom to those who are listening and with us tonight. Chelom has a PhD from Penn State and a law degree from BYU. Currently, she's a professor teaching at BYU in the School of Family Life. She teaches 2 classes, and I imagine a lot of what you teach is going to leak into what we're going to talk about today, because we're talking, or what you teach, the classes you teach are healthy sexuality in marriage. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And marriage prep.
Yeah.
And your research focuses are sex in committed relationships and mindfulness.
Right.
Chelom has been married for 36 years and has 9 kids, and she loves being a mom. Also, very important to know, I'm sure it will apply to our subject today, but she also owns a castle in Scotland.
Right.
So Chelom, we're super grateful and really excited to have you with us today. Is there anything you want us to know to start about yourself to start?
Not really. I guess I just feel passionate about this topic. I feel like being able to blend the gospel with the research I do is such a blessing in my life, and I think in my students' lives.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think this is, I'm just really excited that this is a discussion that's being talked about, because I think in our faith culture, there's a lot of misconceptions that happen around this, and it trips up relationships and families and couples a lot. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think you're right, Kimberly. I think that I see the culture shifting just a little bit. I've noticed just in when I began teaching at BYU how it was really hard to kind of pull students along in having healthy discussions. And it's become much easier. Those, I don't know if it's those that are selecting in to take the class or just much more prepared. But I think what I've noticed is a general trend that we recognize this is a problem and we're kind of ready to address it. At least enough of us are that we're starting to see some momentum.
Can you elaborate what you mean when you said recognize this is a problem? What are you pinpointing there?
Recognize talking about sexuality, sex in general, just being open as a couple, but then also being open with your children so that they kind of are raised in this healthy environment where their questions are answered and it's not shamed and it's just open and comfortable to talk about sexuality in all of its different subtopics.
What an
Fantastic.
important conversation that you are bringing to college students. And I love that you even referenced just family life and with your kids and taking it out of this. We don't talk about it. And so it results in us feeling uncomfortable or shame when I think it's usually not talked about out of sacredness, or at least like that's the idea about it, is keep it sacred so we don't talk, but it results in feeling like we can't talk about it or it's something that would be wrong to talk about. So I love that you're bringing that into all of these different capacities.
Yeah, and I will say that often in class, students, as we move along in this conversation, they're really concerned about, okay, how am I going to do better than my parents did? And they want to know, how often should I talk about sex with my kids, that I don't even have yet, but with my kids, my future kids. And my rule of thumb is that this ought to be just an ongoing, comfortable conversation, like when we talk about your friends, or we talk about your hobbies, or we talk about the atonement. The atonement's a very sacred topic. And I say to them, if I only had one conversation with my children on something as meaningful and important as the atonement, how much would my kids be missing out on? So really that has to be just woven through our life, that we talk about this regularly. I talk about how the atonement has a huge impact in my life, but I also talk about how, as they're maturing physically and emotionally, sexuality is going to have different meanings to them. And they're going to prepare in different ways and have different challenges. So that just needs to be an ongoing, regular conversation. I give the rule of thumb that as teenagers, we really probably need to be having a conversation a week in some way, that we just say, yeah, how do your friends handle boyfriends and girlfriends? Bring that up, or bring up, any topic that seems to be present in their social life and in their maturity level.
I love
The
that.
Yeah, you talked about having these sexuality conversations once a week, and I thought, how am I telling my kids about the birds and the bees once a week? But then the example of like boyfriends and girlfriends, and how are you handling that? What are some of the other age appropriate ways that you recommend bringing this topic just into family life?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I will have to say, some of the things I did in my own family was I love to have my kids' friends over at our house. And then I would maybe just eavesdrop a little and hear the conversations. What were they talking about? And my kids were pretty open with me. So we would often talk about what were some of the challenges or awkward situations that they might have faced in their own friendships and peer groups. And so things I remember when my older kids were in high school, the plastic bracelets were just coming into fashion, and there were all sorts of, different mottos that were on these bracelets. But what I didn't know, and one of my kids brought to my attention, was that different colored bracelets meant that you were open to different sexual experiences. I hadn't known that. And so I did a little research and we talked about that. Like, why might that be a signal that some kids are giving to each other? And why might we want to maintain boundaries around things like that?
So it's very applicable to where they are, and
Yeah.
it's interwoven in their development. And consistent with, I guess this is what you just said, where they are developmentally, where you're
Yeah.
just meeting them where they're at. And what I think I hear also is opening up for them perspective based on what they're experiencing through this dialogue and curiosity about what's going on. Oh, let's talk about that, and helping them expand their view of their own experience based on the added wisdom and experience that you're having, that you have, that you're bringing to them.
And the nice thing is, every step of the way, we can be talking about it in this really comfortable, values-based way that also is supported by research, by really good principles that we know to be effective. And so I think that there's a lot that parents can add to what children are experiencing. For example, my 9-year-old, our dog, our little puppy, just went into heat. And so she was asking, about what does that mean? And we had already had a pretty complete conversation. And I said, well, just like women, when they start menstruating, animals do that too. And so her body is maturing so that she can maybe have puppies someday. And so there's just another way for us to just insert it and casually make our kids aware that we are always open. We are always a good resource, excuse me, and we have good information that's accurate. They don't need to be going other places. Like, the two places that our kids will go to get information is the internet and their friends, their peers. Those are the two worst sources of information on this topic. And so,
Absolutely. What are they
really,
going to find if they Google anything sexual?
right. So it's so important for them to know we're a really good resource. You don't have to Google this. And if I don't know it, I'm going to do the legwork to get good information for you and bring it back so that you still are in this safe, healthy environment.
Mhm.
I love
So,
the application of topics of just even body positivity and talking about menstruating and what that means and what's happening and the purpose of that. And it's not something that's embarrassing or shameful. It's just this is and bringing what I'm looking for, just ease to all of
Yeah.
these topics that might have been uncomfortable in my generation growing up and taboo probably in the generations before that to talk about these things, but allowing it to just be we're allowed to just talk and ask these questions.
Yes, you are absolutely right, Ashley. And I will say the opportunities to talk about this are more prevalent than we are aware. I think because as parents, we're a little uncomfortable and not quite sure that we can master these conversations. So we hold back until our kid is pretty direct or we feel an urgency to talk to them about something. But the truth is, I remember when two of my boys were in elementary school and I was driving them to school. And there was kind of an inappropriate billboard along our route to school. And for the first couple of weeks of our commute, I would just kind of distract them, like, oh, look at the bank on the other side of the street. And I was like, okay, that's silly. And they've probably already seen it. So instead, I took my own advice and I said, hey guys, what do you think of that billboard? We have seen that every day as we go to school. And we just had this conversation about modesty, about how we feel about women's bodies. And it just brought up so many important questions that they had. And they knew this was a good thing to talk about. And it was a really fun conversation, actually.
you know what's clicking for me? I'm having an aha moment here
Okay.
where in this boundary-less world when it comes to sexuality, it's actually our willingness to be open and honest and step into that space to bring boundaries to a world that our kids are growing up in that has no boundaries around that. And opening up the conversation, opening up the space creates or allows you to create a structure in a world that really doesn't have a structure for sexuality or has a very warped,
Yeah.
misattuned structure. So you're by opening up to it, you're bringing boundaries to protect your kids by giving them other messages
Right.
and other ways of comprehending and understanding this reality that they're being faced with.
Yeah. I think we've kind of abdicated our authority on this topic, and it's
Mm.
because we just don't talk about it. That's most often what I hear from my students. Probably 80% of them say, we just didn't have. Maybe we had one conversation and it was awkward and stilted, and I couldn't wait for it to finish. But instead, we step into this culture and we're well aware, we're informed, we're not turning a blind eye to what our kids are facing. They are facing a culture of permissiveness. And what we can offer them is, hey, I know this is tough. And it's a really fun conversation. It's a really fun topic. It's a really important topic. It's powerful. It's designed by Heavenly Father Himself to draw a man and a woman together in their marriage and strengthen that bond. And so when you start talking about it in all these positive, exciting ways, powerful ways, our kids are like, that really makes sense. And then you can bring in, the principles of the gospel that it is intended to be used within a fully committed relationship where I am giving my everything to to this partner, and they are giving everything to me. Now that's a safe place for me to share my body, share my deepest emotions, share that chemical connection we know through oxytocin as it increases in arousal. Sex is very emotionally bonding as well as physically bonding. And so we explain these things to our kids and we're like, this isn't something to just throw around. This is something to use for its intended purposes, which is really wonderful, really joyful, and we can be really, happy about preparing and talking with them about all of these topics.
Ashly, you're muted. I see you're really excited though about what you're saying.
I talk with my hands. It just happens. So for you. You're reminding me, I have this client. He's in his early, maybe mid 20s, and he's dealing with a lot of sexual acting out behaviors that he personally would prefer not to have. And when I was first meeting with him, I said, here's the thing you should know. You might feel uncomfortable because you don't talk about sex all the time, but I talk about sex all day long. So I'm perfectly comfortable. So while you're sitting over there uncomfortable, please know I'm not uncomfortable and I'm here. Ask all the questions. Let's just talk openly about it. And then the question I had for him was, if I were to speak with parents and say, hey, here's some advice from someone who's on this path, what would be your advice for them? What is it that you needed as a teenager in your home to help you? And he said, I wish we had just talked about it. I had no idea. I had no idea what was going on. I had no idea how it would impact me. I had no idea. I wish we had just talked about it. So, what you're saying about just having the conversations and making it a regular part of your family culture resonates with what I've seen on the work that I do of how that could have helped people.
Yeah, it really is. It's part of who we are. We're born as sexual beings. And especially as we develop, through maturation, and then we start understanding in adult ways how to connect with another person. It's something that is pretty core to our identity. And so tamping that down from a very young age does a lot of damage. And opening it up and allowing this to be something where the person you're talking to is comfortable and can answer your questions really helps people be able to go through that maturation process and develop emotionally and start to understand sex is not just about physical urges. It's about creating a connection, a meaningful, loving connection with someone that I'm willing to sacrifice and commit and give to, right? So we don't, even in our sex education in school, we really just talk about the physical aspects of it. We don't talk about the relational aspect of sex and the emotional aspect of sex. And, from my research, emotions are probably the biggest contributor or distractor from sex, right? If I have mature, I can emotionally regulate, I can share, vulnerably my feelings, I can give and receive. Those sorts of things are so key to having good sex, to having meaningful sex that really strengthens a relationship.
So it's about being deliberate about how you use this power to accomplish what you want it to, rather than having it be misused and creating
Yeah,
bonds that are actually going to be confusing and destructive or have to be torn down.
that's right. And think about all that I just described. And if we are going to really have these conversations with our kids, it's so much more than the birds and the bees. It is about, are you checking yourself when you get a little angry? Why did you get angry? Are you regulating your feelings as they, go up and down in different situations in your life. Are you ready to sacrifice for another person and really give them the best that you have to offer, right? There are so many things that we can actually help them understand that sex is complex and we need to be really talking about not only the physical aspect of sex, but the emotional, the spiritual, the relational, all of those things matter as well.
You are presenting this fall at the LDS Kappa Fall Conference. Do you
Yes.
know which day you're presenting?
I think it's on Fridays. That's the
Friday.
6th. Is that right?
Friday is the second day. Yep.
Yeah.
All right. And what will you be presenting on?
So I will be talking about just how to have more open conversations about sexuality, whether it's as a couple or parent-child in any setting, right? How can we have these conversations more comfortably?
Very nice.
What's interesting is that we know from research that couples aren't talking about sex. They might be having sex, but they're not talking about it in a really intimate way. And so we know that there's just this barrier about exposing really my emotions and what I feel about sex, about my body, about how we interact with each other. There's so much to that. And we really need to start helping couples be much more vulnerable and open with each other and speak up. That's a problem oftentimes, and we often associate it with women, but I think men don't speak up as well about what they're really needing from sex, what they're really hoping would change, or what's going great, right? And give a little praise, a little kudos for, yeah, that's going super. So, yeah, I think we just need to be able to start helping couples feel like, first of all, this is okay. And not only is it okay, it's critical. We have got to start opening up these conversations so that we can allow sex to be the strengthening power that it's intended to be in our relationships.
Isn't it interesting that the act of sex is less vulnerable than talking about my needs in sex?
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're probably familiar with David Schnarch. Uh, love his work. And he talked about how often couples have sex with their eyes closed or just cheek to cheek, right? Not even looking at each other, but how very vulnerable it is to open your eyes during sex and actually watch each other, right? How is this sharing of our bodies resonating with my partner? How is it resonating with me? Can we actually take in that information and be that vulnerable with each other and then use words and talk about it?
That's incredible. I'm curious if you've noticed in your research and your time with this how pornography and the impact pornography has had on our attitudes. Well, I guess I'm going to shift this question. Have you noticed in your research or in your teaching how, with the increase of pornography, that's shifted our attitudes about sexuality as a culture, and how so?
Yeah, I don't think that there's any disagreement in the research about the fact that pornography has changed people's expectations in sex, that it's supposed to look like pornography now. And that is really concerning. Now, there is a little debate about does it really impact, the quality of the relationship or other aspects of the relationship. And we know that in general, I think most research would say yes, it long term, it has very negative effects on the relationship. Does pornography arouse you? Well, yes, that's what it's intended to do. But at what cost? Right? At what cost are we partaking of that? So I would say what I have noticed is that more people, it's much more common, right, for both men and women I would say it's something that almost all men are have at least been exposed to and have maybe had more than just an initial exposure, and many, many women. And so it's something that I think we just have to, again, just draw the sting and talk about it. And not talk about it shamefully, but say, this is an issue. And we know that this changes expectations. We we want to talk about this in our relationship and how it has impacted it and how we can weed it out and how we move forward.
I love that courageous vulnerability and being able to lay truth out as a way of moving beyond getting stuck in,
Yeah.
well, all of those issues that couples often have where they get stuck are often due to a lack of communication or ability to talk about.
Yeah, and one thing that I have noticed lately is that especially young people, I think as we age, we maybe come out of this idea a little bit. But I think young people really feel like sex is a performance. And they don't understand that sex is a process, that it actually, sex starts long before we ever get naked with each other. Sex starts with how we treat each other and talk to each other and sacrifice and, negotiate household responsibilities. And then it bleeds over into how do we now share our bodies and our emotions with each other. And so if there are little resentments from other areas in our relationship, they are most certainly going to come up in sex. I think it was Esther Perel said that sex is just a microscope on the larger relationship. And I think that's really true. Whenever we see a problem in sex, it's likely because that same thing is happening in the larger relationship. So sex is really useful for us. If we're dissatisfied with sex, we probably need to look at everything that's going on in our relationship and, how are we handling that?
Yeah, it's an interesting lens that helps to present us with where we need to grow, right?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. It is such, our partner is such a mirror to us. They let us know how some of our behaviors or attitudes don't sit well with them, or maybe some of our comments, right? And so we then have to say, that's fair. Yeah, I had never seen that about myself. And now I have to take a really hard look, and that's painful. And we hope that as we go through this process, both partners are loving and, encouraging and can rise to the occasion of the challenge. But it is a lot of work to kind of do that self-inventory and be humble enough to say, yeah, I do need to make some adjustments and I'm sorry.
I
On
love
a
that.
on a slight tangent of that, I could see how that piece of it in a relationship that isn't what you just described, with both people willing to step up, both people doing the work, both people doing the self inventory, it could result in a power dynamic of one person doing all of the work to change and inventory, and the other person just saying, sex for me is great, life for me is great, I never need to change, and unintentionally engaging in abusive behaviors toward this person who's doing
Yep.
all of the change. How do you see that playing out in the research that you've done and the work that you do?
I don't know that I have seen that play out in my research, but what I have read quite a bit on those dynamics. And, we really have to be careful that there is a balance of power in all aspects of our relationship. And sometimes that means I really like an example I give actually in my marriage prep class. I say, if you're on a date and you find yourself doing all the talking, and it's like you're kind of carrying the relationship, and it starts to get exhausting, and you're doing all the things to keep the date interesting. What do you think you should do? And we generate some ideas, and it's like, well, maybe tell the person I'm exhausted, or tell the person that I would like you to ask more questions or offer more you know ideas. And I said, absolutely, all of those things are important and good things to try. But at some point, if we are doing all the talking, we need to shut up. We need to allow that uncomfortable space of not carrying all the load, and say, okay, you need to also contribute if this is going to, be a viable relationship. And so at some point, either partner needs to speak up and say, okay, I feel like I'm not very appreciated, so I'm gonna withhold. Withhold is a bad word because sometimes it's taken in a negative way, but I'm gonna pull back and do things that I want to do, and that I'm not gonna feel resentment if it's not appreciated, right? So I'm gonna speak up for myself. And I think that that is something that many people struggle with, is learning to set the boundaries and say, we're going to carry this relationship equally. Now, of course, there are going to be times where I carry it more because of circumstances, or you carry it more because of other circumstances. But in general, we need to find what is a good balance for the two of us. And that doesn't mean we each do things 50-50. It means if I'm doing the laundry, you're keeping the cars clean, or you're loading the dishwasher, or whatever. But yes, that is absolutely something we have to be aware of. And again, doing a little personal inventory and saying, am I getting worn out? Do I feel a little resentment that I'm making all these adjustments and it doesn't seem to be reciprocated?
I love that analogy. I needed to just shut up. I'll tell my clients, we've got to see what your partner chooses to do. And they can't choose to do things if you always jump in and do the things.
That's
So we're
exactly.
just going to be quiet and see how the conversation goes from there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. If I stop doing the things that I've been overburdened with, there's going to be this awkward space where it's not getting done. And, the other partner's looking at like, aren't you going to do it? And that's where the learning comes.
Yeah. Interesting. My last question for you. What scripture or doctrine do you see in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints that you use to inform your work, and how does it play into what you do?
My favorite scripture is very short. It's be still and know that I am God.
Mm.
And for me personally, it recenters me. It calms me. I have a tendency to get super excited about things and maybe worked up sometimes, and I when it's kind of stepped over the line a little and I'm feeling anxiety, I need to be still and trust God, know that he's there. And so for me that really like kind of just blends into the research I do on mindfulness, and how slowing down sometimes is the most productive thing I can do. And being quiet is very important to feel the spirit, but also just to know yourself.
So I have two questions I'm going to blend from what you just said. These different topics. You mentioned mindfulness, and why is that so key to good sex?
Mm.
And related to that, how does you talked about the spiritual aspect and sexuality and the intersection between that? So can you speak to both of those
Okay,
before we end here?
I'll do the first one, and then you might have to remind me the second one again.
Okay.
Why is it so important to be mindful during sex? We know from research, from lots of studies, that people feel heightened anxiety in sex, maybe because they're a little self-conscious of their body, Or it can be a positive thing that they're feeling arousal and that creates, a little faster heartbeat, more blood flow. And so we notice anxiety kind of makes our brain a little fuzzy sometimes when we're feeling heightened anxiety. We don't think as well. And we know, particularly for women, women seem to have a mind body disconnect. So women can actually be feeling arousal in their body, more lubrication, more blood flow, muscles contracting in their genital region, and yet they will report that they're not feeling arousal because they're not really tuned in to what their body is actually experiencing. So we know that being mindful, slowing down and kind of creating that connection, focusing on my breath, because my breath is always with me, just focus on my breath, really seems to help women and men, but women especially, into their physical experience and actually appreciate the pleasure, the arousal that they're feeling. They feel more connected to their partner. We actually did an intervention. I've done a number of interventions now where we asked people to report on certain measures before, and then we taught them how to be more mindful during sex, and then they reported on those same measures afterward. We saw dramatic increases for both women and men, but we saw that women reported having more orgasm consistency, more physical sensation. So we know that it's so important to actually be embodied and feel this connection with another person that is emotional, physical, and I will say spiritual. And this maybe ties into your second question, is how is sex and spirituality connected? Everybody in our doctrine, everybody comes to earth to get a body. Lots of people will never hear the gospel, may never even know who Jesus Christ is, but we all get a body. And experiencing emotions and how the spirit speaks to us in a body is so instructive for us to understand. And so I would say that sex is one of those things that it is divinely appointed to create this connection between a man and a woman in a loving, committed relationship. And it absolutely helps us touch the divine if we are approaching it, right, with that attitude. If we are giving to the other and sex is other focused and we are connecting in that very important way that is arousing and pleasurable and at times can create another child, but it's deeply connecting for people.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you. That was absolutely inspiring. I love bringing those together because I think historically, maybe this was just me, those concepts, sexuality and spirituality, were almost at odds with each other.
Very
And so,
fragmented.
what's that?
Very fragmented.
Yes. And part of the healing or these conversations that you are leading and that you've had with us today, to me, shows that a healing of those sacred concepts and an alignment of them so that they're no longer at odds with each other. They are actually very deeply, richly, sacredly congruent.
Yes, I agree. I think that sex is deeply spiritual. If we are experiencing sex in its healthy form, it can help heal us, like you just said, from past hurts, from emotional wounds. If this is a safe place where I am fully accepted and I am fully accepting the person that I'm engaging in this with, emotions will often surface. And if we honor those emotions as they come up in sex, that's where we find a deeper way to bond with our partner than any other activity. A loving Heavenly Father who knew life's going to be hard, marriage is a challenge, we're going to have bumps and bruises that kind of pull us apart at times, but He gave us this tool of sex to bring us back together in this powerful way and reconnect. And so when we use it that way, it is such a blessing to our marriages.
Very
I
cool.
feel like I'm feeling the spirit. I love that we're talking about, like, and it does to me, this experience of being able to hear and learn from you help to connect those two concepts experientially for me more so than have.
Yeah, no, like I said at the beginning, I feel passionate about this because we really do need to help these conversations be healing and be spiritual. Yeah.
Thank you for leading.
Yeah.
Leading, teaching.
If other mental health professionals were interested in consultations or presentations or trainings by you, are those things that you offer? And if so, how can they get a hold of you?
Yes, I actually pretty regularly do a training on sexual mindfulness for therapists. And you can just get a hold of me through my email. I think that that will be on your website. It's just Chelom Leavitt at gmail.com. And I have an Instagram. I think I gave you guys the information on that. And I have a website. So you can get a hold of me. And I usually post different conferences or other things that I'm speaking at or trainings that I'm doing on that.
Wonderful. We'll make sure all of those things are linked in the notes so anyone who's interested can grab those easily. Any last thoughts that you would want to leave with the listeners?
Let me just give that a thought. You can edit this, hopefully, so that I don't look like I'm pausing so long. I guess I would say don't underestimate the importance of sex in relationships. Sometimes we don't give the attention to sex because we have busy lives, we have children and jobs, and we let it kind of fall by the wayside. But this is a pretty important thing to kind of keep a good barometer on how healthy is our relationship. So I would say prioritize sex, give it your attention, make sure that you talk about it with your spouse.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for coming on, Chelom. It has been delightful to just have this conversation and think about this topic in a way that I've never connected the dots. I think I've instinctively felt some of the things, but I've never connected all those dots before. I'm really excited to attend your presentation this fall.
Me too. It will be fun.
Thank you. It was absolutely inspiring. Thank you for your courage, and it must be hard to do what you do and lead. You have to have the vision and the courage to lead the shift or be part of that. And so thank you, genuinely.